Estamos en otra entrevista educativa de Educar Chile. En este caso tenemos la posibilidad de conversar con una invitada muy especial, con Judith Little, socióloga, profesora por muchos años de la Universidad de California, Berkeley. Fue decana, la profesora Little de la Facultad de Educación de Berkeley durante mucho tiempo. Y su especialidad han sido las comunidades profesionales de aprendizaje, es decir, las comunidades de aprendizaje entre docentes. Sobre eso es que vamos a hablar en este programa. How are you, Judith?
I'm just fine, thank you, Jose.
Well, we want to talk about these professional learning communities. That is part of your work. You have write a lot about this topic and do a lot of research about it. The first question maybe is, what is the definition of a professional learning community? How you can define that? Because you can think that in any school you have a lot of teachers that are together and have some activities together. What is the difference between a professional learning community and this sort of natural form of collective life together in a school?
I think we've begun to reserve that term for schools where teachers come together frequently, but really for purposes of digging into questions of their teaching and their students' learning, and really recognizing the complexity of trying to achieve strong educational outcomes for all students. I think this is, and there are particular practices we could talk about and particular attitudes, but I'd like to say that in many ways the importance of the learning community idea is driven by our recognition in the US, and I believe there's the same recognition here, that schools have a big challenge in achieving high levels of student achievement and school completion for students of all economic backgrounds. And so this problem of equity in educational outcomes is the backdrop, is the impetus for us to think about how schools are organized for teachers to work in ways that really accomplish a great deal, and it's a lot to ask.
You think that they have another professions, the physicians or others that have professional learning communities more than teachers? This idea also come from other workplace?
The example that probably is used the most often and where people draw the closest parallels is medicine. And if you think about the kind of what I would call interdependence in medicine, it's clear that the medical field cannot accomplish what it needs to without people sharing their expertise and working together. So it's impossible to imagine brain surgery without the contribution of multiple people who share expertise, who have a way of talking together, who are engaged in problem solving in the moment, but also thinking about ways to advance their field. There are other fields also where you can't imagine an individual accomplishing the work that needs to be done. A symphony orchestra, large ship navigation into a crowded harbor. But in teaching, we've tended to organize schools as if we didn't need that interdependence, as if each teacher working alone with his or her children could accomplish these ambitious social and educational aims.
That's very interesting. How you can think that is the more typical activities or practices of a professional learning community?
I should say that early on in this research, when I first began to recognize some of the practices that set some schools apart from others, we didn't call it learning community. We were just looking at teachers' professional relationships with each other and noticing that in schools that were able to adapt to large-scale external change, school reform, schools that were able to accomplish a lot with vulnerable student populations in urban schools, that the practices of those teachers somehow were different. They were set apart. So we didn't call them learning communities then, but we did call them schools with very strong norms of collegiality and strong norms of experimentation and innovation. So teachers in those schools talk together frequently and with great specificity about their teaching practices and about what their students were learning. So they would bring samples of student work and examine them together. They observed one another teach. They were observed by their principals. They used observation to really learn about the learning environment in the whole school, but also to give feedback. They developed the materials and ideas of teaching together. They planned together. They shared materials that they got from elsewhere. They would teach one another and help one another learn. So if a few people went to a professional development activity that they thought was useful, there was a culture where they could come back and share and help each other learn. And throughout, as they used those practices, they displayed a curiosity about student learning. They displayed a sense of courage, I think, in questioning their own practice. When students were failing or students were struggling, they didn't assume it was the student's fault or the family's fault. They thought, we must find another way to reach these students. So they questioned their own practice and that they really felt an obligation to keep learning. And those practices, while we saw them among teachers, were also actively supported by the school principal.
Why did the school arrive there? How when you analyze that and you compare and I understand in one of your research you arrive at this conclusion, you see some of the schools that have this professional learning community and others no at all.
Yes.
And why was the process of this one that arrives to build this kind of other type of relationship and other type of culture, I will say.
Well, it's interesting you asked that question because I think over the years we've developed far more research that locates individual examples of this very strong collaborative culture or professional community. We have far fewer examples of how schools got there, of the process of developing that, because schools, as I'm sure you know, are really not socially or physically organized to make collaboration easy. Schools are organized so each teacher teaches in his or her classroom with his or her students and has independent responsibility for how the class goes. So, it's, in a way, it's unexpected to find this strong relationship. We do have some ideas about this. Certainly school leaders play a big role. And
school leaders are sort of catalyzers of this process, of coordinators of this process, facilitators of this process?
Yes. I mean, part of it is I think they see that the goals of the school, trying to achieve the best that the school can achieve, and meeting the challenges of the school, are not pursuits that individual teachers can easily accomplish on their own. That the school as a whole has to tackle the goals and the problems. And so these are principals who see that we need to find a way to define the problems together and to work on solutions together and to get smarter together. And so they set about finding ways to do that. They create time and space for these kinds of conversations to happen. They help supply teachers with external support and resources, professional development, networking opportunities. They, when they meet with teachers for, say, a weekly or a monthly staff meeting, they don't use the time just to talk at teachers about administrative issues. They don't use the time just to supply routine information. They use the time to really have some deeper discussions, some problem-solving discussions, to look at evidence of student learning. They help to cultivate leadership on the part of teachers. So they can, a good principal can see teachers who are respected by other teachers and help those teachers move into leadership roles and help really take some responsibility. So there's just the daily work of saying that you matter as a group, teachers, you matter, and you want to make sure you matter to each other and do something together that it's hard for individuals to do alone.
To build these professional learning communities must have maybe some conditions. For example, time to the teachers to be out of the classes and to dedicate it some time to work together, to have all these collective actions and to build these professional learning communities. In Chile, we are now we have a new law for the teachers' career that have a more longer time for this non-instructional time or not class, not time just in front of the class for the teachers. What do you think about that? What is this condition of the time crucial, and what are others possibility conditions that you need to impulse this kind of practices?
Yes. I think in terms of three different kinds of conditions and supports, kind of structural supports, the cultural, the organizational, cultural supports, and then some technical supports, tools, resources. But first and foremost among the structural supports, and one that teachers always talk about, is time. So I was very interested to see that in this new law, there is a shift in the ratio of in-class to out-of-class time. And I prefer to think of it in a way that way, a neutral framing of that time, because if we think of it in terms of teaching and non-teaching time, it's as if we think when teachers are out of the classroom and outside the presence of their students, they're not teaching. But of course, there are many teaching tasks that take place outside the classroom. And if you think about the teachers' work with other teachers, teachers' communication with parents, teachers' work with the principal, that's all work of teaching. So the ratio of time in classroom to time outside is crucial to being able to collaborate. Teachers have to have time, just basically they have to have time and space. Many of the teacher groups that we've studied over the years actually, and it's one of the reasons I think that such collaboration is still so rare, is that they're doing it on their own time. They meet after school, they meet on the weekends, they meet in summer without pay. And that's not sustainable as an institutional support for widespread collaboration. So we can't count on people using their personal time to really.
It cannot be a sort of heroic
That's
work.
right.
It's a professional work.
That's right. It can't be heroic. It must be an ordinary work condition for people as professionals to be able to consult with other professionals and to pursue complicated work with each other's support. So I think that time issue is absolutely central.
Another thing that is important, that in Chile we have it's a tradition that you have a weekly meeting among the teachers and the principal or the technical chief of the school and so on. But in some occasions, these meetings are really administrative. Or how you can define a good meeting in terms of this learning community?
Yes.
How they can use this kind of meeting? You have some lessons learned about that?
Yes, I think so. It's important that whoever is facilitating or leading the meeting, and someone needs to be productive, you can't just bring people together in a room and expect something magic to happen. There needs to be something we're working on, an agenda that calls for people to be together. So someone needs, and the group needs to, in a way, agree on something worth working on, but someone needs to take responsibility for creating the setting where the way we're spending time together requires that we be together. So one thing that we've learned is for principals, when they have those meetings, not to use them to just convey information. There are other ways to convey information, especially now that we have all of the electronic resources. So a principal can do an informational bulletin once a week and expect that teachers will read it. It may take a while to get that habit, but you don't use up people's time sitting in a room where they don't need to talk to each other. They're just hearing information. There are other ways of conveying the information. And so the norm can get set that if we're going to use your time to come together, we're going to be doing something that requires us to be together, right? Some kind of problem we're working on. And if that becomes a habit, people can get very good at using even small amounts of time together to move forward. But someone needs to set the task or the agenda so that it's about group discussion and about some problem we're working on or some goal we're trying to achieve that makes clear what the value is of being in the same place at the same time.
And they have some kind of organization of teachers in terms of that, for example, the teachers that work in the same discipline work together or the same level. This kind of communities of learning, maybe it's not only one community of learning, but they have different sub-communities.
That's right. So you've got to have a reason to be together to benefit from each other's contributions. So we've seen many different forms. In the secondary schools, often it's the subject department, or even the group of teachers in a subject teaching the same grade level, where they have some reason to benefit from exchange with each other. So that same group of secondary teachers that may meet as a group of mathematics teachers on one day may be meeting on another day with teachers who all teach. For us, the 9th grade entry into high school, into the upper secondary school is an important year because students often struggle with that transition. So sometimes teachers across subjects, but who all teach 9th grade, will come together to think about ways to support the students in making that transition. So it depends on where the points of common interest are, who's in the room. The primary school, often the lower primary grades, where you're trying to really build early literacy, have reason to come together. Yes, and it makes it difficult at the secondary level to imagine school-wide community, but you could nonetheless have a school where, with the support of leaders, all the subject departments, all are strong, supportive communities. And maybe you very rarely come together as a whole school, or when you do, you report on what you're doing in your separate subgroups. So yes, it needs to be sensibly connected to the work people are really doing.
Maybe a precondition also is that you have some teachers that are prepared to work together. And then is the role of the Faculty of Education.
Yes.
Do you think that in Yale, what can be this preparation for the new teachers? Yeah. Because in Yale we see just the other teachers that continue to be prepared as sort of isolate work.
Yes.
That they know a lot about their discipline, but they don't know a lot about how to work together in a collective forms.
Right.
What do you think about this topic? You have good experiences in this type of new training and preparation that we need for participate in these professional communities?
Yes, I think one of perhaps the biggest impediments has been teacher education, in which teachers are left thinking that the job of becoming a teacher is about finding your own personal style, rather than developing a real expertise that's shared in the profession. So one thing schools, faculties of education can do is to try and build cohorts of beginning teachers who conduct a lot of their activity, their lesson planning, their rehearsal for being in the classroom, their analysis of how classes went, maybe through the use of video, doing that work together. And there are good examples of that now. Particularly, I think the growing use of video, individual teachers video their classrooms, bring it back. The collective look at records of practice, whether it's samples of student work, classroom video, sample lessons, where that's done as a group together. That would help. Just having teachers prepare from the beginning by being part of a professional discussion. And seeing the ways that the work that they plan for and prepare for is stronger when it has the contributions of multiple people. So that's one. Another thing, however, that faculties of education can do, those that have leadership preparation programs, is begin to prepare principals and other school leaders who know how to foster this kind of collaboration and how to support particularly schools in bringing in beginning teachers so they are part of a whole staff community. So both preparing teachers and preparing leaders. And then of course there's research. And I think one of the things we could be doing more of in faculties of education is research that shows how to grow these learning communities where they do not already exist. You know?
Okay, well, thank you, Judith, for this possibility to discuss and to dialogue with you about these professional learning communities. As you know, we have all the time a last question for our guests in this program, which is the idea: what if you need to give to us, the Chileans, only one advice about our education, what will be your advice?
Well, I'm new to Chile, so I feel a little tentative about giving advice. However, I've been impressed to learn about this new law, and I know it's in its early stages, but there's the intention to enhance the teaching career. And so one piece of advice, I guess, advice might be too strong a word, one thing I would be very interested in seeing is how the country now capitalizes on that law and realizes the benefits of that law. And one piece that relates back to what I just said is, I think, investing in the preparation of school leaders, and perhaps also the assessment of school leaders, so that in ways that help build schools as cultures of improvement, cultures that are in school workplaces that really make for teachers as powerful a learning environment as they're trying to make for their students.
Okay, thank you. Bueno, muchas gracias, Judith Warren Little de la Universidad de California, Berkeley, por esta posibilidad de conversar sobre las comunidades de aprendizaje entre profesores. Y a ustedes los dejamos invitados para seguir viendo en Educar Chile otras entrevistas educativas.